Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible comes together to fulfill the story of God.
I'm Abby.
I'm Jay.
I'm Fletcher.
And I'm Jen. And today's story is about the OG Friend Squad, David's Mighty Men.
Yeah. And you may have heard an extra name in...
What? There was an extra name?
There was an extra name.
What?
We have a very special guest today.
That's right.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Jen,
Hello, Jen.
and I'm your friend.
Friend Jen.
That's... Anyways. Yes. And do you play any other role in any of our lives?
I was Fletcher's camp pastor,
Okay.
Wow, interesting.
and I was his parents' friend.
Okay.
Very nice.
Still friends?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would also be the lead pastor at the Barrie for Methodist
Oh,
Church.
that's why you're
Yes.
here.
so that would make me your
Not
boss.
that we wouldn't
That's
invite
true.
you
Yes.
for any other reason.
And Abby's boss.
Yes.
Abby's
And
boss.
Jay's boss.
But
Yeah.
I'm still Fletcher's friend.
There we go.
Just Fletcher's friend, though.
Nobody else's.
We gotta figure out a way to make you Fletcher's boss as well.
Oh, wow.
The podcast starts getting money, maybe.
There you go. Sponsor us.
Yeah.
There we go.
I'm just joking.
So yeah, we're delighted to have Pastor Jen here joining us today as we talk about David's Mighty Men. And so we have a question.
As usual.
As usual, David and his mighty men sparked Abby to think of Taylor Swift. And you're thinking, well, how did David's mighty men cause Abby to think of Taylor Swift? Well, probably because Abby is always thinking about Taylor Swift, but because Taylor Swift had her squad, right? This was a big
Yeah.
thing. She had her
In
squad
2014.
in 2014, and
She's
so
telling me this, and I had no idea. So she's
I didn't
like,
actually.
Taylor Swift had this squad. I'm like,
I'm not enough of a Swiftie to have known about this.
Jen, did you know about
like,
Taylor Swift's squad in 2014?
To be honest, I don't think I could name you one of Taylor Swift's songs.
Oh,
Oh,
well, then there we go.
Oh, my
wow.
goodness. I'm a little bit offended.
That's okay. That's
And-
fine.
My heart
So
hurts
I had
a
to
little
Google
bit.
her.
That sound
Oh my
you hear
gosh.
is my daughter leaving our church because she's a Swiftie. I did a little bit of research, and apparently there are people that are off of the squad. It's
Oh, yes.
like they're not together
Lot of
anymore.
drama?
No.
Okay.
There was a lot of drama.
So all of that to say that that has kind of just sparked this question of if you had to put together a squad of actually 10 people,
Oh, no.
who would be on your squad? And we're not going to share all 10 today. We're going to limit it to 3 for the sake of time.
Well, the nice thing is David's squad is 30, so you already gave us a break by
That's
doing
right.
10. And
That's
today we're
right.
only doing 3. So
Right.
And the rest of our squad members, I will post on Instagram sometime this week so you guys can see who actually has the best squad.
There you go. And I'm sure Abby will stack the votes in that. So,
yeah. All right.
So who would be on your squad, guys?
I'll go first
Okay.
in case somebody steals. No, I'm just joking. It hasn't happened in a while. But the 3 that I thought of immediately were Vicini, Fezzik, and Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride. You got the brains, you got the brawn, and you got the sword fighter. And I thought, why not? This quick 3. Good movie. Good
go.
squad.
I must say on my original list, Indigo Montoya was on my
There
list.
you
but
go.
Okay.
AKA Mandy Patinkin, like
Okay.
the real guy.
Would you
Okay.
would you rather the character or the actor, though? That's the question.
Mandy Patinkin can sing.
Oh. And you don't think Inigo Montoya can?
He doesn't sing in the movie.
Yeah, but
So you
does
don't
that
know.
mean he can't?
Well, he doesn't.
He doesn't.
He doesn't.
He just doesn't.
He's too busy.
Could.
So I'm gonna, I would. On my list would be Mandy Patinkin,
That's
the
great.
real person.
That's
Okay.
great.
Okay.
Are you
And
gonna
your
go
other
He's
2?
not one of my 3
Oh,
though.
okay.
Oh, he's not
He's
one
one
of
of my
your
10.
Oh,
okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So
Let's hear
That's
your
such
3.
Who are
a
your 3?
wait 1 second. That's like a really random person to have overlapping. Like,
Mandy Patinkin.
yeah.
But it's the loyalty aspect of it, right? Like that is what makes him so good about being on your squad. If you're going to choose someone to be on your squad, you want someone who's going to be loyal to your team,
Right.
which is who David's mighty men were. So you want the loyalty.
yeah.
There you go. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Jen.
Okay.
Well, why don't you
So
go
yeah,
next then?
that
Other than
queued up.
Mandy Patinkin, who else you got?
All right. So I have the Queen.
Oh.
Oh.
Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth.
Why?
Wow.
Honor, integrity, the same every single time you see her. She is
Okay.
so consistent. And when she gives her Christmas address, she always lands the plane on who Jesus is and the reason for the season. Like always continually brings people back to who Jesus is. And I really appreciate that. Second person is Stephen Harper.
Okay.
And I would love to have him on my team. I believe same reason, man of integrity and honor. When he was brought into office, he actually took his oath on his own personal Bible. Like he carried it up with him. And so I was like, yes, I would love a chance he could be on my team. And then, okay, third one, toss up between Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice.
All right.
Or Mark Lowry, who is from the Gaithers. Because Mark Lowry is hilariously funny, and you always need someone who's funny a part of your team, right?
That's true.
And he
That's
too
me.
can sing. Or you know, Mr. Darcy, who is also Mr. Loyal, Mr. Integrity. He gets the job done without having to involve other people. Like, I just love it. Like, nobody knew what he was doing. He just went and did it. And so when the heroine comes, it's already done. And it's just like, oh yes, that's what I would love to have part of my team.
Okay.
Okay.
All right then. Well,
Do you have yours? You want to go?
you can go.
You want me to go? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I would have Fred Van Fleet
Who is
in
that?
Whoa. I can't believe
I
you
don't
just.
know who it is either.
Whoa, Toronto Raptors.
Jen is staring
Yeah, I
in
know all
shock
three.
for all
I
the
can't.
people,
I'm just
too.
trying to figure out who I'm doing a podcast
try
with.
again.
that you
Start
get-
again.
No. I want Freddie Van Fleet on my squad for sure. When the Raptors won the championship, he was beaten up. His face, he had like stitches in his face. He looked like somebody who was in hockey playoffs because he just went to war for his
Dirty
team.
basketball player.
He was,
I get it.
No, he's not dirty. No, he is like, if you need someone to get the
people
ball
up.
down the court and get the shot set up or take that, like, he's there. He's the man. So
Okay.
Fred Van Fleet. And then Forrest Gump.
Okay.
I want Forrest Gump on my squad because I can be grumpy like Lieutenant Dan. It's pretty much, and I need someone like Forrest Gump to remind me that there's a brighter side to life at all times. Like, he's got the, I mean, who is more optimistic than Forrest Gump?
It's true. There you
really
go.
can't think of. So yeah, and
SpongeBob SquarePants.
Or Elmo.
okay, well, you guys can put those
Elmo,
people on
Elmo
your
got a little
squads,
grumpy
that's
every
fine.
once in a while.
And then Brennan Manning is another one that I would love to have on my list.
He's an author. I know that one.
Yeah.
Fletcher's shaking his head.
He
Jen
wrote
and I know
The
this
Ragamuffin
one.
Gospel, which
Okay.
I highly recommend it as a book, and because the message of that book is that God loves you, and you may have screwed up and done things that you think would disqualify you from the love and grace of God, but they don't, and he just shares very honestly about his life in the way that God's grace is so real. So I would love to just have him reminding me of that on a regular basis.
You guys are taking these questions so seriously. I just thought of the first three people, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. And then Abby was telling me who. She's like, well, maybe this and maybe
person.
this, and she was like
Listen,
thinking about it. And
I have to think
don't
of who
know.
I'd actually
and
wanna
now
hang out
you
with.
listen to her answers, and it's the most not boring, but like practical answers you could think of.
Is Taylor Swift in your squad?
I can neither confirm nor deny.
All right, let's hear it. You'll see when this gets posted.
Okay, well, I'm not going to confirm or deny that one right now. But I think the people that I put in my squad are going to be very offended that you called them boring. For sure.
I said practical. I corrected myself.
The first one I'm going to do is Bob Goff because he's a lot of fun.
He would not be boring at
See,
all.
no.
Yeah.
And he loves Jesus and he
Yes.
does a lot of really cool things. And I need somebody who's just going to be like, let's do something and actually does it. So he would be one. Another one, I don't know if any of you will know her, but Katie Davis Majors.
Yes.
She just, her heart for
Author.
Jesus.
Okay.
She lives from Uganda and, well, she's not from Uganda, but she's lived there for a long time now. And oh my goodness, every time I read something by her, I'm just like,
She connected to
You
Bob
get it.
Goff in Uganda, or
no.
no? Okay,
No. They probably know each other though.
right.
And then the last one I'm going to pick is Annie F. Downs. And she would be very offended that you called her boring too. And
I don't.
Talk show author.
podcast,
Okay.
yeah, she's pretty great. She's just a lot of fun. She knows a lot of people. She also loves Jesus. And I like people that are fun and love Jesus.
Okay.
So, Those are going to be
So
my
opposites
3.
attract, right, Abby?
Hey.
Oh.
Hey.
I'm just
Listen.
joking. I'm just joking.
I think you love Jesus, Abby.
Me too.
Aw. You love Jesus too, or you love me?
No,
Sure. Whatever you need. Whatever you need.
So as always, we'd love to hear from you. Who would be on your squad? Apparently, we're gonna have you pick through our squads and see whose squad you'd like to join, maybe. But if you have any other questions or anything that you'd like to send along to us, you can do so at story@bfmc.org. And of course, as we jump into our story today, and any of the stories that we're looking at throughout the podcast, we encourage you to read them for yourselves to get the whole picture of what exactly it is that is going on. So, a little bit of background as to where we are today as we look at David and his mighty men. Last week, we talked about Jonathan, the son of Saul, being David's best friend. And today we're talking about David's other. So David had more than just one friend. Which
He had Jonathan, and then he had his other,
and then his other friends,
his other group,
right? And these are the men that he traveled and fought with. And so, in this part of the story, David has been anointed as king, but he's not the king. Saul is still in charge, and the Philistines are the biggest threat to Israel at the time, and there are constant battles and struggles with them throughout Israel. And so we just see this, and they're just like, they just don't go away.
No, they're always there.
They're just always there, and so that's where we are.
Yeah. So getting into kind of the history of what's going on at the time, again, it's within the same years as last week, so it's nothing too different. David's born around the year 1040 BC, and he's anointed king around the age of 15. Kills Goliath around the same time as well. Then he becomes king of Israel between 1010 and 1003 BC, and that's just because he was first king in Hebron and then king in Jerusalem as well. But today's story takes place before he is king, but after he's been anointed king. So he's actually in the service of Saul for about 7 years, and then on the run from Saul for a few years after that. Mm-hmm. And then one quick note that we kind of have to add is that in 1st and 2nd Samuel, there's a lot of numbers that actually just aren't in the text that we have. Right. So these are interpretations of the numbers that we do have. So they're not going to be 100% in case anybody's going to be a stickler about it.
Right. Right. Which is, that's a difficulty with placing dates on a lot of the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is not a history book, which is there to give us all of the dates and times. And so there are some things that are missing. Or
even the ones that are specifically history books.
Right.
Just have numbers that we don't have in our copies because it's so old, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So as for what's going on in the world, it's the same as last week. You know, it's the Greek Dark Ages. Nothing's going on. Egypt isn't doing anything, and the Assyrian Empire collapsed in 1070. So all the really major kingdoms in the area are not up to very much. And really, Israel's biggest threat is the Philistines, like Jay said. And they lived on the plains, on the kind of the coast of the Mediterranean, the Philistine plains. And they were really warlike and didn't do much else. We don't actually have any art or pottery or history from the Philistines themselves. All we know from them is from the Hebrew scriptures and from Egyptian texts and Assyrian texts. So that's the only thing we know about them.
I guess it kind of makes, if they're preoccupied with war, then they're probably not doing much in the way of artwork and writing and philosophy and all that stuff.
And I'm just wondering if this is one of the nations that they should have kicked out when they first came into the Promised Land, which also raises, that thought of, when God says to deal with something, like just go ahead and deal with it so it doesn't continually come back and bite you in the butt.
That's really a theme we've been talking about almost all season, because we talked about Saul's or last season.
Last season too,
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit of geography. You can go listen to last week's if you want some more. But basically, the one fun fact I have here is King David's castle was most likely in a place called, I'm going to say this wrong, but Khirbet Kiafa.
I was really impressed. I didn't know how you were going to do it, and
thank you.
I was working through the phonetics myself, and
there you go.
Good job.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I'll place an article that's from the Smithsonian Magazine in the show notes. So if you want to read more about that, you can. There are some pictures in that as well. But yeah, there's not like a specific place in this story because we're kind of talking about people. So
And we'll cover it in the story as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
so not as much today.
Do you know if Kirbet Kiafa, I don't know if I even said it the same way that you did, but
Close.
that's before he was king in Jerusalem?
This is where David's castle was, so I'm not.
Because of like
100%
later
sure.
on he conquers Jerusalem and that becomes the capital, right? So I guess that would have been before. Cool.
Maybe.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
asking.
we can look in the article.
Right.
Mhm.
It'll be in the show notes.
Probably
So I'm
is.
giving
There you
Abby
go.
more work for later on.
There we go.
So let's start off the story of today. It takes place both in 1st and 2nd Samuel. 1 Samuel's chapters 22 to 29, and then 2 Samuel chapter 23. And if you remember back to last season with kind of David and Saul, David has been anointed king, like we said, and Saul gets really paranoid of David, and he eventually kicks him out of his service, and David is now on the run for his life.
Right.
So, yeah, that's where it really starts off, and this is when David meets this group of people, and he goes to it's called the Cave of Adulla, and his father's family kind of joins him. And then it says the men who joined them, they were men who were distressed and in debt and discontented, and David actually became their commander. So out of the people that came to see him, he got all the
Lost
stragglers
boys.
and the lost boys. Sure.
Just the kind of people
Yeah.
you want
Yeah.
surrounding you while you're on the run.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So he really didn't get the cream of the crop for soldiers. So he got 400 men to join him, which is, I mean, it's a decent amount.
Yeah.
But, you know, the debtors and the...
I mean, if you can't have good men, you might as well have a lot of them.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Or is it something like where David was looked down upon, right? Like he was the kid coming in and nobody
Right.
saw anything good in him. And so is that why all the stragglers came? Because it's like there was worth in them, but nobody saw that. And so
Right.
David saw that because he
Yeah.
was rejected for his outward appearance. And so he's actually seeing these men. And we read the story a little bit further on where it's like, wow, like these guys accomplished amazing
absolutely.
things.
Right.
So is that where David is looking at them saying, no, like 1 Samuel says, like, God does not look at the outward
Right.
appearance,
Yeah,
but he looks
absolutely.
at the heart. And is that where David's like modeling that behavior
Yeah.
right there by saying, you know what, I see something greater in you.
Yeah.
You'd even think that he's echoing what happened with Samuel and his brothers, right?
Yeah.
You know, not this brother. Samuel's like, well, this guy could be king. No,
Right.
no, for 8 brothers or whatever it was. And David was the youngest, the least qualified. And
Yeah.
he's picking the same men in his...
Well, yeah, and that verse
Soldiers.
that comes into play in both ways because David is just like Samuel saw what God saw in him to anoint him eventually after going through the list, and so he's seeing that in these men, but the rest of Israel is looking at Saul and saying, "Oh, look at
I'm gonna
that
go
guy!
fight for that guy."
That's who I want to align myself with."
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So David now has his men, and he's going off. So God calls to David to go to Keilah and to save the people there. So they're being attacked by the Philistines, and Keilah's, if you look at a map of the land of Judah, it's on the west side, closer to the Philistine plains in the on the coast of the Mediterranean. Anyway, so the men are like, we're scared where we are in Judah, let alone let's go to Keilah where the Philistine camp is,
Right.
and attack them there. And David again goes to the Lord. He does this a lot, which is good. But he hears from the Lord, and God says to him that they will win the battle. So David convinces his men, and they go to the city of Keilah, and he delivers them from the Philistines successfully. So that's great. They win, even though they were terrified. They managed to get the win because God promised that they would.
yeah.
Yeah. So we got to keep moving on because there's a ton of stories with these men. So eventually David and his men have to go. They're running from Saul, and they end up staying with the Philistines in Gad with a man named King Ashish, who's actually our next episode's
So we're not going to
topic.
talk
We can't
too
talk
much
about him
Hush,
too much.
hush,
today.
hush.
But
We don't talk
they end up
about King
leaving their
Ashish.
wives and children. We don't talk about Ashish. That's funny. They end up leaving their wives and kids in a place called Ziklag, and that's where they stayed while the men...
So what's really interesting about that story about compassion is in this particular story, when the 400 go off, David actually has about 600 men. 400 go off, and the 200 are tired, so they stay with the provisions, and they go off and win all the women and children and stuff back. And when they return, the 400 warriors just want to give the 200 that stayed their families. And
They wanted to hold the animals,
Everything
food,
else, the spoils.
the spoils of
And-
war. Yeah.
And David says, no, they are just as important as the 400 that went off. Everybody gets a share. And it was from that point on that we get this precedent that is set that every soldier, every warrior is entitled to the same amount of reward. And whether or not they go into battle or they are not in the battle, but maybe they're staying back and protecting the supplies, they are entitled to the same amount of reward. And it just speaks to David's compassion. And we see that, right? We see that as part of his integrity and honor, is that everyone is treated to compassion. We see it with his son Absalom, but that is just who David was as a leader, which actually speaks into why he also continued to allow these ragtag ruffians to come and be a part of his team.
To be, that's right.
So one time when David and his men were traveling back to Ziklag, David now has 600 men, and they arrive and find that Ziklag had been destroyed, and all the people were taken captive by the Amalekites, who were at war with the Philistines, right?
Yep.
So David talks to a priest and asks God, whether he should pursue the Amalekites or what he should do. And God tells him that they will catch them. And it's like, yeah, right, they're going to catch some army who's, 4 days ahead of them. But while they're on the chase and while they're on the run, David and his men meet this Egyptian man who was basically left to die in the desert. And they clothe him and they feed him. And the Egyptian man says, oh, I'm actually a slave to an Amalekite man. I know where they're going.
Right.
So it's like, what are the chances of that? So they now have this Egyptian man leading them, and they end up catching up to the Amalekite army. And they find all the women and children and family that had been taken. They find them completely alive, which is great. And then David and his 600 men are over to overtake the Amalekites, defeat them. And only 200 people got away,
right?
Because they had camels and they rode away on them.
Yeah. So
which I found funny. I'm reading. I'm like, and they got away on camels. Nice.
So
Are
it's
camels fast?
Yeah.
Well,
How fast are they?
I mean,
than
in
running,
the
I'm
desert, they're
assuming.
faster than me for sure.
I'm gonna Google it.
How fast do camels run? Yeah, we'll keep talking. While you...
But this, like, it is never wrong to show compassion. And to come alongside those who are sick and hurting. They come across this abandoned man who's been left to die.
Yeah, in the desert.
And they show him compassion, which, fast forward, we have Jesus talking about this very similar situation, and people passing by and missing out on what God actually has for them. But these David and his men, they come alongside of this man and end up being shown favor in war because of it. Given victory because they just did the right thing.
Yeah, they helped the guy out, and it ended up making them be able to save their families and their wives.
So never hesitate to do the right thing.
Right, there you go.
And most likely, you will not see people run away on camels. And a camel can run 65 kilometers an hour.
Wow.
They're not catching them.
They're not catching them.
No.
That's good. It's a
Wow.
lot of kilometers in an hour.
So kind of what we're seeing is that from David getting these stragglers, he's starting to collect more men, first of all, but he's starting also, they're becoming warriors. They weren't before. They were just kind of the people that went with David, and now they've won a few battles. They're starting to get better, and David and God is leading them into victory after victory, and that's kind of really cool to see them grow as warriors. So yeah, David and his men are beating Philistines. They're fighting other nations. They're fighting for Israel. And we actually see is 30 men that really stand out as David's mighty men, and that's actually what they're called in the Bible.
I love that so much.
That's their title.
It's so fun.
And these are men that kind of performed great feats of bravery or great feats of strength. And if you go to 2 Samuel chapter 23, there's actually a list of what they did and who they were. Every single one of them is named, and we have all their names from, 3,000 years ago now.
Yeah.
All their names are on that list, and that's really cool. So we're going to go through a couple of them. There's the main three who did some cool stuff. So I'm going to try to pronounce it here. Josheb Bashabeth. And he actually killed 800 Philistines with his spear.
Right.
And it says at one time. So like in a battle, 800 Philistines. That's a big battle. Oh, that'd be
I
exhausting.
wonder how long that took.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I never really all day, all night, couple days. Wow.
See, I'm thinking about the Battle of Helm's Deep, right? With Aragorn, and I could see him totally like killing 800 like orcs.
And Gimli and
Right?
Legolas are counting 1, 2.
It's totally it. Like
They were having a competition.
You didn't get that
799,
reference?
800.
Yeah.
If you did not get that reference, you're not alone.
That's okay.
What?
And
You
then
got
he was
Lord of the
killing like the Oliphant, and it would only counted as 1, of course. Because elephants count as 1, not a bunch. That's also from Lord of the Rings. I'm sure Jen
There we
understood
go.
what I was talking about.
She got it. Sorry, nodding.
Well, because
as you were saying
Aragorn
it.
would be one of my top 10.
There you go.
Oh,
nice.
okay.
Slowly giving them
He'd be
away.
good. That'd be fantastic. She got me all on Lord of the Rings now. I can't
There
think
we
of
go.
anything else. So yeah, Josheb, Bashabeth, and 800 Philistines. The next guy is Eliezer, son of Dodo. Jay at Youth brought up Dodo the other week, and I found that very funny.
Did I?
Yeah,
it was
there
in
was
one of your pregame things.
there was a
Oh,
quiz.
that's right. That's right.
Is there a dodo in the
biblical
Bible? And
two
there is.
truths and a biblical lie?
Yeah.
There was
So anyway,
Dodo,
yeah.
Dorcas, and there was Bozo.
Bozo, yeah.
Which
That's
wasn't. There's no
Bozo's
one named
not
Bozo.
in the Bible. So Eliezer, son of Dodo, he fought so long in a battle that his hand got stuck to the sword. It was cramped closed, and he couldn't open it. That's how long he was fighting.
Wow.
Wait, so that's a feat?
He was brave, I guess. I don't know. That's
Okay.
what it says. I didn't make it
I
up.
mean, to fight so long that your hand is
Cramped
cramped,
closed.
like, because that's fighting through pain.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the next one is Shama, son of Aggie. Agee is how it's spelled. You can pronounce it however you'd like. And him, when the Philistines attacked in a big lentil field, all the Israelites fled, but he stayed and pushed the Philistines back, basically single-handedly.
Yeah.
And he fought them off and ended up fighting them back. So
You
that's
gotta-
a feat, Abby, if you're not impressed by cramped
You
sword
got to
hands.
protect that lentil field.
Yeah, exactly.
No, he was eating the lentils, obviously. Lots of
There you
protein
go.
there.
he was eating while he was in war. But these 3 men that we've just said actually did one important thing. Is one day they were camped out, and David casually mentioned, I could really go for some water from the well of Bethlehem.
Right.
David is from Bethlehem, if you remember the story. So these 3 guys kind of get up, and they end up going to Bethlehem, which was occupied by the Philistines, and they break through the lines there just to get some water for David, and they end up bringing it back for him.
Wow.
My
And
gosh.
David's like, I can't drink this. Like, you paid for this with your lives. I'm
Right.
not gonna drink it. So what a nice guy, offers it as a sacrifice to the Lord, because he's not gonna accept water. Like, if somebody goes out and risks their lives for something, holy cow, it has to have a lot of value.
Right.
So that was really brave and courageous, if not stupid of them, maybe. But
I was just thinking that's something Forrest Gump would do for me. Right?
absolutely.
He'd go get that water.
That's so good.
So the 4th guy, and he was just as famous as the 3, is what it says, but his name is Benaiah. That one's an easy to
Benaiah,
pronounce
yeah.
name. And this guy was just as famous, and he was actually made David's bodyguard
Well, and he is the only guy that we hear about
afterward.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first 3 are like, yeah, okay, and that's all we hear. But it was Benaiah,
Yeah, sure. Benaiah? I don't know. We'll have to
who
look
sticks with us through the right into the reign of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's who stood out for me in the list.
Nice. And then, there's another one is Uriah the Hittite, of course, is at the end of the list, and we
Right.
hear about him.
With Bathsheba.
Yeah.
But anyway, Benaiah, and he's famous for chasing a lion into a pit and killing it. And he also fought these 2 Moabite champions and killed them. And he's done more than one. He was pretty cool. He killed an Egyptian warrior with the man's own spear.
With
So
his
he,
own
he
spear.
took it off the guy
Gosh.
and was able to kill him.
Yeah.
So he was another famous warrior. And you can go to 2 Samuel chapter 23. And starting at verse 24, there's a list of 37 men that are David's mighty warriors. And these are the men that fought alongside him from kind of when they were recruited all the way through, and they did these great feats of bravery
Right.
and courage. And that's why they're mentioned today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think what stands out for me is the fact that they did not give in to a spirit of fear.
Right.
They just kept moving forward. Whatever it was that they found in front of them, they just kept pushing forward. We don't hear them turning and running. We might hear them being afraid, but they continually pushed forward and moved forward and won the battle. And the one that I like I said, it was Benaiah. His integrity, loyalty to David enabled him, like he was the king's personal bodyguard. Like it says the other three did mighty things, but he was his personal bodyguard. So there's an element of loyalty and trust there that says, I'm going to pick you out of all of these people to be my bodyguard. And we see that consistently throughout. So when Solomon was made king, it was this personal bodyguard who enabled Solomon to become king and got rid of Joab. It was Benaiah that went to the temple and removed Joab. And you just see it consistently all the way through, that he did not allow fear or insecurity or even, a lion to get in his way of being fully committed to King David.
And well, as you mentioned, Joab, he's not trying to get anything for himself. Whereas you read all of what Joab does, he's one of the commanders of the armies of Israel. But he worked for Saul, and then he worked for David, and then he kind of was an opportunist, and he did what he did to stay in power, as opposed to being a loyal, willing to risk his life, but we see Benaiah is.
Yeah, the one that always stands out to me is Uriah, because I'm like, David actually sinned against Uriah, right?
Right.
By sleeping with Bathsheba, and he still served him. Like, he knew it was happening, and he still served him, and he went out and died for him. And I'm like, wow, that's, if you're talking about loyalty, like, that's
even
crazy.
Loyalty to David to the point where he wouldn't go sleep with his wife, right?
Right.
He was a member of the army, and he's not going to abandon his men like
troops,
that,
yeah.
right? So that is loyalty that is unquestionable at that point. It's really impressive.
Yeah. I love, as we think about just the transformation of the men and how like they were these ragtag, in debt, all these like the descriptors that you shared earlier.
The
Well, I didn't mention
the Lost Boys,
the one of the translations, they were in dire straits.
So they go from dire straits to mighty men, but all because of the work of the Lord. He gave them victory. He called them into, he said, go here. They're like, well, why would we go there? That's worse than where we are. You're sending us straight into the hands of the Philistines. Yeah. And God says, and I'm going to give you victory. And when we operate in the confidence of the victory that's secured in the Lord, then we are transformed. And we operate out of that confidence, which just changes everything, changes our outlook, changes the way that we see the situations that are placed in front of us, the difficulties, and we see him at work because we can step into situations that seem insurmountable or difficult, knowing that he's given us the victory as we step into them.
Yeah.
The other thing, it goes along with that quite smoothly, but David's leadership of his men. So it was God that transformed the men into great warriors, but David's leadership of the men, his example of courage and bravery, is kind of what pushed them towards that. And we know that when David was anointed king, the spirit of kingship and leadership came upon him.
Right.
And in the early days, at least, and at this point, every decision before battle, you see, and David asked God what he should do.
Right.
And God either said, yes, do it, or don't do it. And he listened to that. And then we see what happens later on. If you read the rest of 2 Samuel, what happens when David doesn't consult God on what to do, and things go off the rails for him. But right now, he's consulting God on every decision, and it is working out well for him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that leads us to our final question. So how does the story of David's mighty men contribute to the fulfilling of God's story throughout the rest of the Bible?
Yeah, and I'm looking at what we just said and thinking, well, that kind of is it, right? The ways that we see the transformation, that we see the way that David led, and one of the thing, and we've talked about this before, just in David's leadership, is that he didn't cling to the kingdom. Even though this happens before the kingdom is actually given to him, he refuses to take Saul's life at one point. He knows, he just rests in God and God's purpose and plan for him, knowing that what God has is what will come about. And so I think, that's one of the things that we see just in his leadership, that's passed down to the mighty men. And then for the mighty men, putting themselves under leadership that trusts God and his plan, is so important for us. And so as we look at stepping into roles, serving in ministry, serving in leadership, getting involved in the ministry of the church, we want to know that we're falling under leadership that operates in that way as well, that the leadership is not clinging to their own power or leadership, but they are seeking to simply glorify God and step into everything that he's placed in front of them.
And I think also they needed the mighty men to protect David, because that was the kingly line, right? So they actually, because they stepped into that role, they protect David. And so that line from Abraham to Jesus, right? That's what, what helps the story be fulfilled, is because they were protecting David. And so often we're like, yeah, but what I'm doing doesn't really seem that important.
Right.
But we've all been given these gifts and talents, and we just have to step into those gifts and talents. And even though we might not understand, they might not be shiny, they might not be talking on a podcast, you might not be the pastor, you might not even be teaching Sunday school. But if God has called you actually to provide, maybe you have the gift of generosity and you're providing the funds to pay the pastor or the Sunday school teacher or whatever it is, and it's like we all have this role to play, and it is so important to step into that role, whether it's finances or teaching or administration. Like, we all have been given these gifts, and we all can become mighty men and women of God in fulfilling the overall purpose.
Yeah.
Look at Jen bringing it back to the season topic of helpers.
right,
That's
helpers.
great.
She's good at thesis
Exactly.
statements.
The closing, bringing it back, and yeah, that's fantastic.
That's good.
All right.
Well, I guess that's all that we have for today. Thanks for joining us, Jen.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
It's been great to be
hope
here.
to have you soon another time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks
Well,
for listening.
Bye
Have
for
a great
now.
week.
That's it. That's all.